We're back, Relational Lives, Ros and I, and today we're going to be chatting with Philippa Smethurst. And Philippa has written an amazing book called 20 Ways to Break Free from Trauma. So this is going to be an excellent episode for anyone who has suffered with trauma, whether it be one incident or multiple little traumas, and you'll hear more about that in the episode. But it was a great chat, wasn't it, with Philippa?
Really great.
I think people will get a lot from this.
I do too, and I think
I did.
Yeah, I did too, and I think it's lovely how she breaks everything down.
Yeah.
In such a simple way.
Yeah, and the metaphors that she used,
and the stories, and I think it's really helps for people to identify with those. I think it's going to be a great episode.
Yeah. Okay, so without any further ado, let's hear from Philippa.
Welcome, Philippa. Thank you for being with us today. What inspired you to write your book, 20 Ways to Break Free from Trauma?
Well, quite a lot of things, really. I think it all started, the book started really when it was the pandemic and we had this existential threat coming towards us. And it was a scary time. And I noticed that people responded to that threat in a variety of different ways, from sometimes becoming very, very believing that the pandemic was under every paving slab and not being able to go out, really very, very anxious. And some people still feel like that. To the other end of the spectrum, where some folk operated as if there was no danger at all, and denying the reality of what was going on. So I then wrote an article about trauma responses, what our minds and bodies do when things are too much for us, when we're frightened, when we don't know what's going on. Going beyond fight-flight. People know about the fight-fight responses of trauma, but there are quite a lot more trauma responses. So really, it was an attempt to give information about trauma. And that's my big thing, really, both from the book and since the book. When people know that what's happening to them might be a trauma response, might be one of the 20 that I write about in the book, almost like their shoulders drop in relief.
Is it? So it's like, something resonates with them about it, and it's that in itself is a relief.
It's a relief for the inner self. It's like, so it's not just me.
Yeah.
Because with trauma, we feel it's just us. We think it's my fault, or I'm the only one, and we're cut off from ourselves and cut off from others. It's a profoundly lonely thing.
Yeah, it can feel very isolating.
Very isolating, although so much of it around. So it's a complicated thing. It's everywhere. It's complicated.
I think a lot of times people don't actually know whether it's trauma, isn't it? We had an ex-paramedic on, and he said he didn't even realise that the symptoms he was having were trauma, because the things he was hearing was, well, when you're going through trauma, you can't sleep. Well, he was sleeping a lot. And he didn't realise that's also a symptom of trauma response.
That's really, really a good point. And I sometimes talk about the trauma thermometer.
Right.
Might be just a moment to put that in. So I think that trauma often is about, if I define it, it's like from the bottom of our spine upwards, there's a whoosh of activation because of this too much. And that could be a one-off event or a cumulative situation. Talk about that as well, maybe, if you would like. But
yeah, definitely.
You've got that whoosh coming up from the bottom of the spine, up into through the brain, the brainstem into the brain, flooding the limbic region of the brain. So we're overwhelmed, and when that middle section of the brain is overwhelmed, the frontal lobes shut down. So we might think that time scrambles and there's a very different sense of what's going on. We might be very clear like time can speed up or it can slow down. Or we, of course, later might not be able to remember anything or even think properly. That's the legacy of trauma that goes on sometimes, is people can't actually remember it, can't think and can't link and can't process, because this is rather like a Coke bottle. If you shake a Coke bottle up, life shakes us up.
If you're listening to this and you're not watching, Philippa is currently shaking a Coke bottle, and this is going to end up in a big mess all over her. Hopefully not over her.
Yeah. So life shakes us up. We're the Coke bottle, and of course, there's the fizz, and sometimes the fizz needs to be released very slowly. We can talk about how that helps with trauma, but
so when you're saying the fizz, when you say, the Coke bottle is shaken up, that's the trauma happening, is it?
That's the trauma, life shaking us up.
Yeah.
Something's happening to us that is too much for us to deal with. It may not be trauma. It might just be a very difficult event, and we feel things and we weep and we wail, and then we recover and then we go on with life. That's not trauma. The trauma is the fizz that doesn't get released. It's the fizz that stays in us. And that's what I was going to say about the trauma thermometer, because like your paramedic, is that visible?
We can see it, and we'll get it up on the screen as well.
It may be the wrong way around, though, the
letter.
letter.
Send it to us as well.
Yes, we'll and put it in the show notes for people who are listening.
Fantastic.
Yes, and if you're listening, there's a picture of a thermometer. There's the blue at the bottom, and then as it goes up, it goes green, yellow, orange, and then red at the top.
Yeah. And there are some words that may seem, if you're watching, the wrong way around. It doesn't matter, because the point is that it's the too much and too little. So too much is the red zone, the top, the boiling part of the thermometer, where you might imagine we have fight, flight, too much activation, not being able to sleep, repetition of memories, the too much of trauma in the red zone, and the too little is the blue zone, where we may go under the radar, but not be able to function, not be able to get off the couch, not be able to remember. There's like a piece of, a sheet of glass between us and the world. We're so disconnected. And also it could be that the paramedic you spoke about was in the blue zone because they were sleeping a lot.
Yeah. I think he'd probably learned to stay in the blue zone because he had to keep functioning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is the thing, I guess, with trauma as well, I imagine, is that we don't necessarily realise, people who are perhaps on the outside of the person who's experienced it, they don't necessarily realise what's going on for the person who might have experienced the trauma, might not be not understanding, that sort of relationship with other people around them can be distorted.
Very distorted. And sometimes, and this is one of my big passions as well, I think we can, if we're not careful, and it's very human, judge somebody for their trauma responses. And that's not to say that being around them isn't really, really difficult. So I say it without any judgment of the person being judgmental, do you know what I mean? But it can be very difficult to know what to say, know what to do. We might give up on them. We might be tempted to say they're just too much for us. What really, and there's loads of stories in the book like this, because I'm quite big on stories. They're all drawn from my practice and from other places, and they're kind of all woven together. But the people in the stories find ways through to post-traumatic something. And often it's because the people around them have done the right kinds of things. Not all of them have, and there's a bumpy ride, but often the people have said they're stuck around. So there's a boy in there called Connor who's adopted, and he is chaotic as a teenager, and he's hanging out with the wrong people, and he's coming towards being of age, so his mum can do very little to restrain some of his behaviour. And she loves him to bits, but is at the end of her tether. And it's a beautiful thing she does, is that once a week she changes his linen, and she puts a beautiful detergent on in the programme. So when he gets his bedding back, and she goes through the chaotic room and she changes the bedding, and he agrees to that. And every week he hugs her and says, "Thanks, Mum." And that's the bit of connection through the chaos. She keeps faith with him. It's just a little example. Often it's about keeping faith with folk and saying, "What do you need?" And also, I've noticed this a lot with people who I work with who are very traumatized, is to look beyond the difficult behaviour, the shouting, the blaming, the flopping around in all kinds of ways, and say, "What do you need?" Almost looking beyond the behaviour to the vulnerability.
That's so important.
With imagination, and not responding in kind. We live in a very reactive world, don't we, where if one person's wound up, another gets wound up, and escalation happens.
It's a very simple thing, really, isn't it? When you think about that, it's what do you need? What do you need from me in this?
Yeah, and then just
sometimes that's enough.
Asking it quietly like that, and not flustered. Whatever you do.
What do you need from me? What do you need? For God's sake, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Because I heard a story about a paramedic, actually, who'd had a most terrible call because he was on a helpline and he was trying to help people in extremis, and the child was dying on the end of the mother was trying to help this child, and it was awful. The child died, and the paramedic could do nothing in that instance to save
real helplessness.
And he was in a call centre with other paramedics doing similar stuff, and he'd had this awful experience. And he said that what he did was he went round the block just to catch his breath and breathe. Breathing is very, very interesting and important mitigation for trauma. And rather than his colleagues coming in and saying, "Oh, what a terrible call, how are you?" Not reacting, they just very quietly said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Yeah." Went back to his desk, and there was a cup of tea and a hobnob biscuit.
It's very British, isn't it?
That was the thing that made all the difference. That small, tiny act of kindness was
the cup of tea, the clean sheets,
very
those
British.
simple things.
Yeah, being cared for, somebody caring for them.
But in a quiet, non-reactive way, because trauma's so reactive, very often.
Yes.
We need the slow, calm responses. Yeah.
Absolutely. Were you about to ask?
No, go for it.
Well, I think it would be helpful to think about trauma and the different types of trauma.
Yeah.
We talk in therapy about big T traumas and little t traumas.
Yeah.
And maybe it would be helpful for listeners to understand that this isn't always one event.
No.
It could be those sort of daily drip feed events that can also be trauma.
Yeah. So I'm so glad you've raised that. So it is helpful to think big T, small t, but I say it with a kind of, that doesn't mean that the small t is less important. In fact, the small t can be just as, if not more severe than the big trauma. But so big T trauma is an event like a terrorist attack, a fire, or a ferry disaster, or somebody very suddenly dying that was completely unexpected. So it's an event, if you think about that whoosh of the Coke bottle I spoke about, it's an event that changes everything from then on. So our worlds are forever changed. I always think of it as before and after. There's a beautiful book called Over. It's a novel by Margaret Forster. And it's a very good way of underlining what incident trauma is. because in this book, the mother, it's from the point of view of the mother whose daughter dies in a sailing accident. And of course, her life is utterly changed. But the text is punctuated with before and after. And I often say this to clients with incident trauma because that's what it's like. Your rug's being pulled away from underneath you and life is forever changed.
Your whole understanding of the world changes.
Utterly.
Yeah.
And you may have time scrambling so that you don't ever feel confident about moving forward in your life. Going forward then changes your relationship with other people, what you think about yourself. That's incident trauma. So small t trauma is an ongoing situation where you may, and this is where it's quite tricky, the tentacles of trauma go to all kinds of places. So an example of accumulative trauma would be a woman who she's got a parent to look after who's got dementia, and she has to go and look after this parent every day, and sometimes the parents are a bit difficult, and so it's an ongoing eroding of the flow of life type of situation. As well as that, she has a special needs child to look after, so she's got both things going on, and most of the time she just feels numb. Occasionally she bursts into tears where she just feels she can't carry on anymore. She's kind of has annoying worry, but mostly it's just numb. But that is accumulative trauma. And so many people in the world today are going on with difficult situations where they're dispossessed, denigrated, and it's rather like paper cuts. You know, if you just had a paper cut in your arm, you wouldn't think that was a serious thing, would you? But if it's repeated on and on and on, and nobody notices, and nobody notices you, that's very, very wounding. And I find that with therapy work and also talking to people about the book and cumulative trauma, once people realise you're living in a traumatizing situation. This is ongoing. And how do you recover? Because you can't really change your situation. Think about somebody in a war zone. They might not even
thinking that with Gaza at the moment, everything going on,
right.
It's happening all the time, isn't it? With all those,
all the
it's
time.
just no let up.
No let up. And where do you get relief? Where do you find a little bit of non-trauma struggling with life? We have to be humble about this, don't we?
Do you think also when people are in those situations where they're getting the paper cuts, that they almost get desensitized as well, that they don't perhaps realise that it's trauma, that they're accumulating trauma? Yeah.
No, there's a woman called Mira Khan who writes about this. She wrote in the BACP journal, but something about that. She said that if you're carrying a heavy load, you don't have time to put the weight down. So you're still carrying that load. So yes, you might not even realise.
But I guess finding ways within that where there are signs of people coping with that, how they are surviving it, and I guess not putting it down is one of the ways of coping with it. Yeah, isn't it? I imagine
it is. And I used to do some work, and I still do a bit, with asylum seekers and refugees in central London, Smarton in the Fields. And what we noticed when there was another psychotherapist, a bit like you two working together, there's two of us, and we were training the volunteers who were meeting with these, mostly men, and we were naively thinking that they might want to come into a little room and have some therapy, Strangely enough, nobody did, because they were so busy surviving, they couldn't. It was also reminding them of being in a holding centre or being taken into a room for interrogation. Wasn't going to be something they were going to want. So what we had to do was think about how do you offer something in a very, very light touch way. You're surviving on the streets. You're already in with your load. You're carrying your load, but you might, within that context of a 2-hour meeting where they washed their clothes, had dinner, played games, you might actually be benefiting from having a 5-minute little bubble of contact, we called it, where somebody who's not afraid just to steadily look and say, how are you? And do some reflective listening and care, just in the way that they were. That little bubble of contact helped quite a lot. And we trained the volunteers just to do that, to sit having a cup of tea with somebody if they didn't want the eyeball to eyeball, if that was too confrontational. But just to sit and to listen. How are you? Great. Psychological contact in bite-sized chunks.
Yeah.
And I think often when the trauma is overwhelming, we can just do little tiny things around the edges very often.
And that's what we thought was really good about your book.
Right.
Which Ali is showing
that I'm holding
at the
moment. It's very easy to read. Like, both of us are not very good at reading books that are just loads and loads of writing, but yours is broken up really nicely. So it's bite-sized paragraphs even that you could just read and put down. And that's probably all you can manage, isn't it, if you're trying to recover from trauma?
Yeah. And so it's a I call it a trauma library. So if you think about a shelf with lots of little books on, or 20 books. Yeah. So whatever kind of trauma you may be noticing, whether you're in fight, flight, whether you're in the zoned out bits, whether your relationships are all over the shop, whether you're alone in the world, or whether you've got a kind of cry inside that you can't let out, but you've latched onto others, or whether you're in a destructive cycle and you don't know how to get out of it, or whether you know somebody like this, you simply go to that chapter. I don't look at the rest of the book. It's not a book. I tell us, damage government health warning. You don't read all the book unless you really want to. Some people do, but most people don't. They just say, well, no, that's the kind of trauma that I notice I'm involved with. So I'm just going to read that. And each chapter has the same format. And all, as you say, it's got bite-sized chunks. It's got the most paragraphs with headings than any book, because I'm breaking it up all the time. Yeah. So you don't want
so
to
helpful.
Get lost in the prose,
Yeah, that's so helpful. And also what I love about it is, like you've said earlier, about the stories. It's bringing it to life so that people can relate to other people's experiences, which again, like you said, then is perhaps feeling less isolating for them. Not only for the person who might be going through or having experienced the trauma, but also, like you say, for those around them. So there's help for people who are supporting in that sort of lovely, gentle way that you're saying, finding gentle caring alongside them. And then also the ideas that you give people to help themselves or for others to help them, which, again, it's so readable and so accessible.
Yeah. And I don't know if you ever read a book years ago, Peter Fonagy did a book called What Works for Whom? And I always loved the title of that, What Works for Whom? Because, if something is as broad and as complex as trauma, then there's going to be, in my mind, as many ways through it as there are people, as there are varieties in life. So, I really did throw the kitchen sink at the book a bit in a way, because there's got so many different ideas, self-help, other kinds of help, what kinds of therapy help if you need therapy, what kinds of ways to approach somebody who you don't know what to do with. And also exercises for reflection, because a lot of this book, lots of the stories are quite stirring up. And this is something else that can happen so easily. You read about somebody else's trauma, it stirs up your own. So it does really need space for reflection and to say, okay, so that's the story. I do feel a little bit stirred up. So what is it that's stirred up in me? We are very complex creatures. We have many, many layers. And I often talk about going down the lift shaft, reflection, 3 R's, repetition, rhythm, and reflection, so that we can just think about what applies to us. And if there has been a little bit of a stirring up of the old Coke bottle, the old Fizz, can we just simply take a bit of breathing space, breathing out slightly, elongating the out breath, waiting for a second at the bottom before we breathe in again, taking breathing space. I've never met any client who doesn't say they feel a little calmer when they take a breath.
Yeah, I love that
go on.
tuning in that you're talking about, to the inside of somebody, so that how does somebody, and you're also sort of saying that we can get a little stirred up, like you say, with the Fizz. And I know one of the things that we hear people say is about being triggered, don't we? And I'm wondering if this is something where that makes sense of that. What does triggered mean? What does being triggered mean? So I wonder,
because people say it a lot, don't they?
Yeah,
I'm triggered.
do.
I'm triggered. You're triggering me.
Well, chapter 3 is on. They do say it a lot, and sometimes they use the T word, either trauma or triggered, rather ubiquitously, don't they?
Yeah.
My bit is to use it correctly. But I think even the chapter 3 is about triggering. I think of triggering as often metaphors are so important to kind of get what these things really do to us. I think of triggering as a pressure cooker. So people may or may not know that they use a pressure cooker these days, but that's the kind of cooking thing where you get a lot of force going up, a bit like the Coke bottle, but there's no place for it to come out. So when you're triggered, you might just explode. That might just be a little bit of the Fizz coming out of the pressure cooker inside. And I often have, I'm sure you do.
So that can happen. That can happen when someone maybe says something that touches on the trauma or acts in a way that reminds you of the trauma. It could be.
It could even be senses, I suppose, can't
Smells.
it? Something you smell or
Very
hear.
much so, like smells, time of year, time of day. You might meet somebody who you unaccountably feel reminds you of somebody else, but you don't even know quite what's going on. It could the resonances can ricochet through our whole nervous system.
In our work with couples, we see that happen a lot, don't we?
We do.
Inadvertently, one of the partners will
activate the other.
Trigger some past trauma in the other, and they're reliving it, and then it's just reactivating it. It's very very difficult.
It's very difficult, and sometimes even the word triggering is a bit of a trigger, but I haven't got a better one. Do you know what I mean? Because
I sometimes use activated.
You feel activated even by the word, you mean? Yeah, because it's gunshot. It's
no, sorry, the activated is a word I use sometimes instead of triggered. Yeah, being activated.
Yeah. But I think there's a really great principle about triggers, and again, not everybody can afford therapy, which is why I've written the book.
Yeah.
We can do a lot to get to know our triggers. So there's a woman in the book called Verdana in chapter 3 who's had, it's a true story adapted. She's had horrible surgery as a child between the age of 11 and 14 on her reproductive organs. Horrible. And it was a long time ago, and the medics said, "Oh, don't tell anybody about it," because it would, of course, inducing huge shame. And the parents didn't tell anybody, and so she didn't tell anybody. And this is what's so amazing about triggering. She was all these years later having a repeated dream, because I think triggers can come into our dream world. And the repeated dream was so wonderful. Our dream's fantastic sometimes. This dream was a plane crash, and she was walking around after the plane crash, and there's debris everywhere. And there were people, and they were saying, "Oh, never mind." And I just thought that was so fantastic, because it was her unconscious mind saying, "This is what people have said to you all your life, never mind. But there's a plane crash." Right? So in a way, that was the beginning for her. The next bit was she, having not told anybody about her surgery, had a panic attack and went to hospital, and they told her that there was no physical cause for her panic attack. It was psychological. Then the doctors looked into her notes and found the story, her medical history. Her husband didn't even know, because she hadn't told him. But that was the start of her getting to know her triggers, where she went to a group for people who'd had this surgery. She told lots of people what it felt like. She started to make connections to others, and eventually she went back to the hospital. Can you imagine how hard that was? She was triggered, but she, in bite-sized chunks, took the decision with her husband by her side to go back to the hospital and reclaim the experience, and also tell herself how brave she'd been all those years ago. Isn't that beautiful? Because
it's
whole
such a lovely story,
thing,
because it takes the whole, like you say, it's through the cycle, isn't it, of what, where it came from, why it was so, silenced in her, how that then played out, and then also having to, in a way, go through the experience, or the feelings of the experience, again, like you say, triggered by going to the hospital, supported by her husband. So again, bringing in that lovely bit of care and support there to be able to work through it, to like you say, respond differently to that story in the present.
Yeah, absolutely. And, sometimes I say to folk, what we need when we're traumatized, like Devon, you go to the Devon or Cornwall, you have a cream tea and you have a dollop of thick cream. That's what we need. We need dollops of self-care, dollops of compassion, to be able
Well, the
to...
whole premise of our podcast is about the relationship that we can have with ourselves, as well as what we can have with other people. So this is what you're talking about, isn't it? Those dollops of cream, or that. What's the relationship you have with yourself? Are you being kind? Can you be compassionate?
Yeah. And there are so many people who are so tough on themselves, who are self-hating. I mean, I know that is a, but it's actually, there's a lot of hate in the world, isn't there? Perhaps now more than ever, but I think a darkness kind of being played out in our environment. But I think often it starts, doesn't it, from the relationship we have with ourselves, and our hating ourselves and making ourselves feel we have to jump over hoops to be okay in the world. And let's say in the introduction, Yuri Brenhofer, I think he was called Brunnenhofer, a child psychologist, said every person deserves at least one other person who is irrationally crazy about them. He's talking about child development. And don't you think that's wonderful? Because we don't, maybe all of us have that, but we need, if we did, to remember that we're worth something, and we can be ourselves. Yeah, God, sorry, yeah. We're allowed to be ourselves in this world.
And allowing ourselves to be ourselves. That's the thing, as well as other people, isn't it? It's that, again, that, like you say, the relationship to ourselves, and how we can change that, how we can change those stories that we've kind of developed in our lives.
On that note, Philippa, in your book, I think you talk about the trauma that we can experience in our upbringing, the attachment traumas as well. So those sort of maybe those paper cut traumas that we can experience when we're very, very young, and the impact of that. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah. So you may have heard of the ACE, Adverse Child Experiences, which is a big study that was done in the United States that shows, doesn't it, that if you've had deprivation, neglect, abuse, lack of care, that you will be susceptible to all kinds of things, not only trauma, but physical effects going into your adult life. So I think that trauma, rather, another image that I use is like dominoes. If you line up dominoes on their end and you touch one end of the domino, they all go. So people come to me in therapy and say, "Oh, I don't want to talk about my past." Or they either say that or my past was fine. And of course, they may not remember all of these things, but it doesn't matter because we work in the present, and the traumas will be carrying on in their present life because they will be triggered by things that have gone on way long ago, won't they? But they do stack up. And life isn't an even playing field, is it, for folk? It's not just. Some people do have a very, very tough start, and the cumulative trauma is what they live with every day,
and then can go into their relationships in their adulthood as well. And
yeah.
I guess that's what you were saying earlier about the couples.
Yes.
Sometimes then it can be activated in the present, in the current relationship.
It can. And not only that, they push the trauma on others. There's a wonderful story in the book about somebody who's adopts a child, and he screams in the mother's face, and she is buzzing with trauma, and she's not the woman she was. She goes to a social services conference, and the trauma-informed speaker looks at the group, but she feels he's looking at her. And he says, you as parents of traumatized children will be feeling your own trauma. It will be finding its way into you. Trauma is catchy. And she said that when he said that, she felt like a bullseye of empathy had come into her forehead, and she felt, she was in tears. She was lost, but she was also very, very relieved because somebody had seen what was happening to her. It wasn't her trauma. It was her child's trauma that she was picking up. And this is why I started psychotherapy all 30 odd years ago. It's because I was in Tiananmen Square, not actually in Tiananmen Square when the tanks came in, but I was in China working with university students at that momentous time in history. And it wasn't my students, but it was my students' siblings and friends. And I sat with those students, and they were having raw emotion of pain because their hopes and their dreams for a future had just been quelled. And it was a serious thing. And there could have been civil war and everything. So I remember picking up the trauma then. I didn't even know I was. But I sat with them and then unflinchingly listened to their stories. And I had this feeling that what was required of me was to witness their pain. But of course, some of the trauma made its way into me as well. And then I got interested in psychotherapy. And the rest is, I didn't realize all this, by the way, till I wrote the book. I didn't put it all together, the Tiananmen bit.
So what was that like for you, for your own experience, the fact that, you had experienced all these different events and, whatever has gone on in your own life? What was that like for you when you were starting to write that book, that you recognised your own sort of vicarious picking up of that trauma?
Well, that's a lovely question. I think it was rather beautiful because it made life come full circle for me. Yes, I've witnessed my own trauma. I've had earlier traumatic experiences too, so the domino effect. But then that Tiananmen, and then it's working with folks, sitting with them for 30 years, quietly doing my work, working with asylum seekers. In a sense, there's been a thread working its way through my life until now. And now the book, and I'm involved in some kind of social justice things because of the book, because the book gives a platform. So in a sense, it's a rather beautiful thing, because this is something that I would say about the good aspect of trauma is post-traumatic growth. So we hear a lot about post-traumatic stress, PTSD, don't we? But we don't hear so much about post-traumatic growth. And this is what I think it is. So here is my little jam jar here. The trauma is the tennis ball. So the tennis ball in this...
holding up a jar with a ball inside it, and it's quite a small jar.
Yeah.
Just for those that are listening.
Yeah, thank you.
It takes up most of the room, doesn't it, in that jar?
Yeah. So this is another jar where it's a bit like Blue Peter, isn't it? One I've prepared.
Here's one I prepared earlier.
So there's a bigger jar. So there's more space around the ball here.
Yeah. So the bigger jar, there's more space around it. So you've still got your trauma, you've still got your triggering, but if you got more space around it, there's more things you can do and you can recover from your triggers quicker. Sadly, my third jar got broken on the way to the podcast. But you have to
on the way to the pub, did you say? Did I hear that correctly?
You're funny. It's a Kilner jar. I'll describe it. It's a Kilner jar, and you can imagine there's so much more space. So yes, there's still the trauma, but there's so much of good stuff that can be taken in. If trauma happens, we know what to do. And that's, I think, what's happened to me is that I've had loads of experiences. I've been very blessed. I've now written this book on trauma, and I've got purpose, because I can make a bit of a contribution about observing what happens to folk, speaking from a place of we, because the whole book, I hope, is a we thing rather than a you thing. And these are the things that I've noticed help folk. Why wouldn't I want to pass it on?
On that note,
I was going to say on that note too.
On that note, Philippa,
3 takeaways.
talking about that, space in the jar, we were going to ask you to give us, perhaps our listeners and our watchers, our viewers, some tips, some sort of 3 main things you would suggest that would help create that space in the jar to help them through their trauma, to recover, to have that post-traumatic growth that we talk about.
Okay, I will certainly do that. And one is, the first one is going back to the idea of breathing. So our bodies and minds are in the frame with trauma. Descartes tried to split the body and the mind. We are all one. So to take a breathing space, metaphorically and actually, what's going on here? Can I take some time to think? Can I take some time to reflect? That's the first one. The second one is to have patience.
Just stay with that one for a moment. How would you suggest people do that, Philippa, if you were, this is how you do it?
Okay, so this is how you do it. I'm going to do a small breathing exercise. You can either breathe in on a count of 4 and breathe out on a count of 7. That will immediately calm your nervous system. Or another way is to do a child's slide, where you go up in your in-breath with your nose, like little steps going up a slide, till your lungs are full. At the top of the slide, you then do a long out-breath with your mouth open. And rather like the child's slide, it's rather long at the bottom. It's longer than you think.
Yeah, I just did that and it felt already just...
You like it?
Yeah, I like the
And
slide one.
people like the visual of the child slide. Some people do
Yeah.
anyway. Yeah.
Good
Shall I go on
image.
to the second one?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
The second one is seeing trauma with time and patience. So trauma often makes us reactive, quick fix, sound bites. That's not to say little things that are sound bites are not sometimes helpful, but often it's a long haul, and often it's about keeping faith and keeping on. You know, I went to a lecture the other day in London about slavery, post-traumatic slave syndrome, about in Black Lives Matter. And the song that they sang at the end was "Keep on, keeping on." Little tiny things actually do make changes in the world. And the third one, can I go on to the third one?
Just stay with that one for a little bit. So it's that having that faith that this is going to take time. You may not see giant leaps of progress, but keep going. Keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are an example being there are 500,000 women in this country whose babies were taken into adoption forcibly. And there's the movement for adoption apology going on, and they're trying to get that apology. So it's that keeping on, keeping faith. And then the third one.
Sorry, just before you go, I'm almost hearing that because I'm aware that some people might find that really hard. But having that mantra in a way, I guess, isn't it? It's almost like even when they feel like things are hopeless or helpless or really hard to keep going, that sort of mantra I'm hearing almost, that it's almost saying this thing to oneself in order to remind yourself that you can keep taking those baby steps even when it feels really hard.
Yeah. And using the fight part of us to say, you know, we will keep on. Seeing the light, if you like, at the end of the long tunnel.
Great.
Yeah. And the third one is compassion and understanding, the dollops of self-care, the quality of care. You know, people tend to come to therapy when they feel that you have the right attitude of care towards them. They wouldn't want to come to a therapist who spoke like that. They would want to come to a therapist with a softer voice. Don't you think that that's what we are so much in need of, is that self-care? And to also see our weaknesses, and this is my Kintsugi. So in the last chapter of the book, Post-Traumatic Growth, I talk about Kintsugi, which you can see is this Japanese bowl which has been broken. It's an ancient thing. But the person the warlord took up the pieces of broken vase and glued them together with gold. And the beautiful thing is that the vase, or the little bowl, is more valuable with the gold, with the brokenness, than it was before it was broken. And I absolutely love that.
Yeah, me too. It's so significant, isn't it, to what you're talking about and how people can feel differently perhaps towards themselves, like you say, by having that kind of image and understanding.
Right. And that they may also feel some strength that comes as a result of trauma. You know, they may have a greater sense of purpose. You hear people whose children have been killed. They say, you know, I would never have wanted that to have happened, but I have this sense of purpose to make sure that this doesn't happen again. That gives them a sense of post-traumatic growth, and it's as strong as gold.
Or the value in life. I know people that have talked about they recognise the value in the smaller things in life post-trauma.
They do. And Terry Waite, who I was fortunate enough to now has become a friend, but he wrote the foreword to the book. He was in Beirut for years, chained to a radiator. He didn't know if the next person that was going to come in was going to kill him. And he came out 1984 or something, but, you know, he of course, took a long, long time to recover. But since then, started 3 charities, and he's an example of post-traumatic growth because he feels that gift of life, and he wants to make a difference. Starting 3 charities. I mean, isn't that an example of this? You know, it's just so inspirational. And I'm not saying everybody has to start 3 charities, but there can be things that can happen here.
Yeah, and I think that's a lovely way to end our chat, as much as we would, I'm sure, love to continue this, because there's so
I
much.
would love to carry on talking with you all day, and your yellow chairs are absolutely delightful.
They're great, aren't they?
Yeah.
And just to say, to everybody, we will put again the information about Philippa's book into the show notes, the 20 ways to break free from trauma. And in the same way that Terry Waite has set up those 3 charities, like you say, you're making a difference with this book, Philippa, which is lovely, and something that we can also pass on to our clients. And I've actually already recommended it to a supervisee.
I'm recommending it to people, and I genuinely, we're not just saying this because you're on the podcast. I genuinely think it's a really good,
helpful
easily
book.
accessible book.
Well, thank you. That's very lovely to hear. If folk want to look at videos rather than book, I've also got a YouTube channel with a little kind of dollops.
You have the links in here, don't you?
And also got a newsletter as well on the philippasmethurst.com website.
Brilliant. We will add all those to the show notes.
But thank you so much. I mean, it would have been lovely to meet you in person, but great to have you online with us. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been an absolute delight.
Take care,
both of you. Good luck with the wonderful podcast.
So thank you, everybody, for watching and for listening. We would love, wouldn't we, Ali, for people to follow us, to subscribe and like.
Yeah, I really like it when people comment. I've said this before.
Yeah.
There's something about having an interactive place, whether it's
I agree.
on the podcast or on YouTube.
Yeah,
so nice to hear from you.
Yeah, that's so nice. I agree with you. Really put in your comments if you can, because we'd love to hear from you.
And the subscribing and the liking helps just get it out to other people. So
yes.
That's what that's about.
Yes, that thing of algorithms of some sort, whatever that means. So anyway, thank you. Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to you joining us for the next episode.
Yeah, see you next time.
Take care.